Is Jesus God? Whoa. I want to say there was probably some hesitancy in that. Maybe a little wishy-washy, not so true. Anyone dare to make an attempt at proving that?
He was sent of God.
Okay, so God the Father sent somebody?
Yep.
Okay, but how does that prove that he's God himself?
So in Daniel, we're told that hero, or I think it's Daniel, there's a couple of references. There's one who's had this, I don't remember. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." In Daniel, it says of God that he will not share his glory with another. And then you have Jesus, who's referred to as sharing God's glory. So if God's not sharing his glory with another, and Jesus is glorified with God's glory, by default he has to be God.
That's one way you could argue it, but you could say that that glory was just simply bestowed upon him for good obedience, much like the ancient kings would see a divine of their own god, like the Egyptians or so forth. And so he could be regarded as divine, but it was more of a received thing, an adoptionist, that not necessarily in eternity past. And so there's ambiguity with that. But is there a verse simply that where Jesus says, "I am God"?
Before Abraham was, I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so he existed before Abraham. He says that, but where does it say that I am the eternal God in that? Or are you inferring that into the text?
The I am he's referring to is Yahweh, which is God's name for himself that he shares with, I think it was Abraham. So he's identified, that's God's personal name. That's like me saying I'm Steve.
You could.
It wasn't lost on the Pharisees.
Yeah, they picked up rocks.
Yeah, but you could say that maybe they didn't understand their own theology that well, because obviously they rejected Christ. They didn't even know that he was the king. They just said, not him. So maybe they were just confused about everything. So let's just say this. Have you ever been challenged with that idea? Yeah. By non-believers? Never a non-believer has ever questioned you the idea that Jesus is God?
Yeah, but they were all wrong.
Okay. But they will often say, where does he say, "I am God," right? Okay. But let's just be straight. There is not one single verse in the New Testament where Jesus flat out says, "I am God." He does not say that. He might say before Abraham was, "I am." And you could make these inferences and, kind of like, well, this is kind of how I want to see it.
I'm the Word, and the Word is God, and the Word is God. That's kind of
John 1:1?
yeah.
Okay.
It's like, hello.
But in Greek, there's no indefinite article, so why can it be in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God? Because a Coptic translation. Oh, let me challenge this.
That implies more than
This is going to be. Uh-oh. So here's the deal. I mean, when you think about other faiths, does all other faiths accept that Jesus is God? No. Okay. But is it core to Christianity? Yes, it is. And so let's just pick up where Matt left off last week in Revelation 1:12 and see what John's vision will help shed some light on this and hopefully answer the challenge to non-believers. I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me. When I turned, I saw 7 gold lampstands. And among the lampstands was one like the Son of Man, dressed in a long robe and with a gold sash wrapped around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, white as snow, and his eyes like a fiery flame. His feet were like fine bronze as it is fired in a furnace, and his voice like the sound of cascading waters. He had 7 stars in his right hand. A sharp, double-edged sword came from his mouth, and his face was shining like the sun at midday. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He laid his right hand on me and said, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last, and in the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. I hold the keys of death and Hades. Therefore, write what you have seen, what is, and what will take place after this. The secret of the 7 stars you saw in my right hand and the 7 gold lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." It's evident that Jesus is the one that John is seeing and describing, as verse 18's character said, "I was dead, but now I'm alive again." So there's no room for ambiguity within the section that it is Jesus as the one that is before John. And just for a point of reference, is that John is still on Patmos at this point, as chapter 4 is when he ascends into heaven to be shown things that will come in the future that is part of the provided outline of the book from verse 19. And at this point, this is pretty much the end of where the church as a whole, between all denominations, agree on the interpretation of the book. But let's just get back to John's description of Jesus. Verses 13 through 16 give a full head-to-toe description of what he saw. Now, some artists have taken this a little far in their work. Just take a look at this one right here. There's literally a sword coming out from Jesus' mouth. I hope you can see that this is a pretty easy example of a bad interpretation of the text by taking this hyper literally. The key word here in the text is like, not is, unless you're using Clintonian grammar. So remember Bill Clinton, the definition of is. All right, got to get one laugh out of that. All right. Now, what John was doing with all these descriptions was using specific words and phrases that he knew the reader would be thinking of from the Old Testament, especially Daniel and Ezekiel. Most commentators will say that Revelation only comes behind Matthew in its use of the Old Testament. It doesn't quote verses directly, like in Matthew you would hear like as is said in the prophet Isaiah or as in said in Hosea. But the allusions are unmistakable like they are here. So, as we are chugging through this book, is that the Old Testament is key to our understanding of what John was trying to get at. I highlighted Daniel here because many will admit that Daniel and Revelation are very connected to one another, especially with the apocalyptic scenes and imagery like that of the 4 beasts in Daniel 7 and the beast that is in Revelation 13. So if you want Revelation to make any sense, Daniel is huge in that quest. But so are these as well that John does draw upon. Daniel actually ranks 4th in its use in the Revelation. It's not first. Isaiah's first, Psalms are second, and Isaiah's third. So I know there's probably been a lot of, people have done studies. It's like, hey, Daniel, 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 Daniel. But how much do you ever get much of Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the Psalms? They actually rank ahead. So if you want some background reading, I honestly would suggest, working or skimming through those books. I know they're really the biggest ones in the Old Testament. But as you just kind of glean through it, and especially the apocalyptic, the end times eschatology sections, is that you're going to see a lot of connections being brought in by John that will be like, oh, I get it. That's what he was bringing up. So let's look at John's cross references in verses 13 through 35 of the Old Testament. Daniel 10, 5 through 6. Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man, clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was also like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as the lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. The connection is quite obvious between Daniel 10, 5 through 6 in Revelation here. So here's a simple Sunday school question for you. Who did Daniel see in chapter 10? There you go. Just hold on to that thought. Next description comes from Daniel 7:9 about his head and hair being white as wool and snow. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and in hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. You can see the white as snow and wool language here, but look at who it was used of in the text. The Ancient of Days. There's no question that in this reference here that it is referring to God. But John takes it and applies it to Jesus. So who is Daniel seeing in chapter 7? Some hesitancy there, okay. That's all right, because this is going to get pretty cool, all right? Just stick with me. It said Ancient of Days, but with the connection between Daniel and Revelation here, looking back, who would you say that Daniel saw? Okay. All right, we'll go with this. Here we go. Now, the throne description is something to track on because Daniel and the reader would be thinking of Ezekiel's vision here, which just happens to be part of John's references. Ezekiel 1:24 has the cascading waters language, but 43:2 flat out says God's voice is like a noise of many waters. But let's go back to chapter 1 of Ezekiel, because the throne room scene there, as in 1:26 says, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man upon it. And 2:1 through 4 explicitly say that the human-looking fellow upon the throne that spoke to Ezekiel was the Lord God. The big thing here is that Yahweh is being described as a what? A man. This is not foreign to the Old Testament prophets. As the contemporary prophet of Ezekiel, Jeremiah, said, then Yahweh put forth his hand and touched my mouth. Samuel, when called as a boy, said that Yahweh came and stood right in front of him. He has to be seeing somebody because he's describing him as standing. And continued to say that he appeared to him by the word of the Lord. Hopefully that sounds familiar. I would add that Jonah fled literally from the presence of the Lord when he refused to go to Nineveh. The common theme here is that the prophets, when they were called, is that it came in conjunction with them seeing God visibly. It was actually part of a way that legitimized their call as a prophet. And you'll see this going hand in hand in the Old Testament. Ezekiel 1:1 says, the visions of God as a man. Now, if you're wondering why I have the word of the Lord all in caps, is that because that phrase in the Greek uses the word logos in the Septuagint translation, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament that came hundreds of years before Christianity. And the only writer that refers to Jesus as the Logos in the New Testament is John. So just looking at these three here, do you see any threefold phrase that kind of comes to mind that you might have just learned about? He who was, is, and is to come. Eternity, first coming, second coming. The prophet Isaiah should be an easy one for all of us because in chapter 6, he goes to heaven and sees Yahweh sitting upon the throne. This scene is without question applied to Jesus in John 12, 37 through 41, when he says he spoke about him. But let's go back further even in history to the patriarchs in Genesis. Jacob wrestled with God all night long and finally realized who it was after he got his hip dislocated by him with just a simple little prick. And you see God appearing over and over again to the patriarchs throughout the entire book of Genesis, during which Jacob explicitly said that it was God Almighty, El Shaddai himself, that he saw. And a really special one for us, though, is in Genesis 19, which deals with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. 19:24. Then Yahweh rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of heaven. Question: how many Yahwehs are in this scene? Two. There's one on the ground who met with Abraham and talked with him about, the promise of Isaac. Then he took him out to the cliff. Abraham begged him, please, if there's a few more, because he was basically trying to get Lot out. Yahweh on the ground. And then he says, what? From Yahweh out of heaven. There's one on the ground and there's one in heaven at this scene. So, what doctrine is proven right here? Oh, stick with me, Faith. Don't worry. Which one? Divine plurality. And yes, you will see this in Jewish translations. And this isn't the only place that you will see this in the Old Testament either. Daniel 7:13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the, or a, Son of Man, came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So, like Genesis 19:24, Daniel 7:13 has two characters in heaven being seen and described. The Ancient of Days was on his Hot Wheels throne, while the Son of Man came on clouds before him. And as said before, nobody is going to call in question that the Ancient of Days is Yahweh here. But what makes the Son of Man figure so special is the coming on clouds language that is all over the Old Testament. In Exodus, Yahweh led the Israelites in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar by fire at night. He was also said to have descended upon Mount Sinai in a thick cloud with additional language that said he was upon the cloud as it came down. Then, after Solomon's temple was built, the Lord filled the temple with a cloud of his glory. In Psalm 18, it says that God rode upon a cherub, the wings of the wind, and had thick clouds before him, which is very similar to the cherub language that we saw in Ezekiel. In Psalm 68:4, it flat out says that God is the one who rides upon the clouds. Psalm 97 says the Lord has clouds all around him with fire going before him, which is very similar to Daniel's vision of God's throne. Psalm 104 says that Yahweh makes his clouds his chariot. Isaiah prophesied against Egypt, saying that the Lord is coming and riding on a swift cloud. Ezekiel said that Yahweh's presence filled the temple with a thick cloud. And the prophet Nahum said that the Lord comes in judgment riding on clouds. So, in these 10 examples, they all say that it is God who comes riding on the clouds. The only exception in the whole Old Testament to this is Daniel 7:13 that says that the Son of Man came riding on the clouds. So instead of possibly thinking that the Son of Man got to borrow Dad's, car here just this one time in the Old Testament, is that we are witnessing one of the primest examples in the Old Testament of divine plurality, with two characters both requiring the reader to recognize each of these as Yahweh. But since the Old Testament is abundantly clear that there is only one God, is that both the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man are the one Yahweh, having the same essence, but are still distinct from one another in their personhood. But Jews aren't Trinitarians, are they?
No.
Not after the first century, they weren't. There's two go-to books I recommend that basically cover this topic in full from the Jewish end. And both are written by Orthodox Jews that flat out call divine plurality heretical. The first is The Two Powers in Heaven, Early Rabbinic Reports About Christianity and Gnosticism by Alan Segal. Right out of the gate, he states that the results showed that the earliest heretics believed in two complementary powers in heaven. Now, this can help you with anybody who says that, oh, no, that Trinity thing was, just a pagan adoption at Council of Nicaea because Constantine had to force, the merger in there to make peace throughout the land. Nope, that's just bunk history. He goes on saying, the extra-rabbinic evidence allowed the conclusion that the traditions were earlier than the first century. What happened in the first century? Christianity, Jesus. This was part of their thinking before Christianity. Simply put, Segal openly acknowledges that Jews did believe in a Godhead prior to Jesus' time. And the second book is The Bodies of God in the World of Ancient Israel by Benjamin Sommer. He states, no Jew sensitive to Judaism's own classical sources, however, can fault the theological model Christianity employs when it avows belief in a God who has an earthly body as well as a Holy Spirit and a heavenly manifestation. He's speaking of a triune God here. For that model we have seen is a perfectly Jewish one. It's not pagan. So, the interpretation that I offered you about Genesis 19:24, it holds up. And Exodus 15:3 calls Yahweh a man between verses that say that he led the Israelites out of Egypt in a pillar of cloud. Now in Jude 5 in the ESV, flat out says that it is Jesus was the one that led the Israelites out. And you will see this in numerous other versions because the manuscript evidence is there to possibly say that this is the original writing of Jude. In most other ones, you will see the word Lord there, Kurios. But most are going with that Jude originally wrote. Nope, it was Jesus. But we need to go back to Daniel 7:13 because this is the one that John referred to Jesus as in Revelation 1:13 and in 1:7 when he said he's coming on the clouds. Does the Son of Man coming on clouds sound familiar anywhere else in the New Testament? It should, because it was Jesus' favorite title of himself that shows up 81 times in the Gospels. The only other person to refer to Jesus as the Son of Man was Stephen, and that got him killed. But the two I want us to look at briefly of Jesus' use is John 1:51 and Mark 14:62. John 1:51. And Jesus said unto Nathanael, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Now, why is that one important, do you think? What sounds familiar in that story that Jesus just said? He just put himself into Jacob's dream of the ladder where angels were ascending and descending up and down from heaven. But in Genesis 28, who did Jacob say he saw? Yahweh, God, at the top. Jesus didn't hide his identity with anyone, including the Sanhedrin. Mark 14:61. Again, Caiaphas asked him and said unto him, Art thou the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. And what happened right after he said that? yelled blasphemy. He didn't have a case against Jesus. Nobody did. Until that point, that's what condemned Jesus. Because he did what? He equated himself with God. And they knew what he meant. But it was actually all part of his plan, the redemptive plan, as Jesus told John, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last, and am the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. I hold the keys of death and of Hades." There's nothing to be afraid of in this world because the God-man came down and conquered death for us. And even here, he makes himself to be God by using the first and the last language that is straight out of Isaiah 44:6 and 48:12 that says, "There is no God besides me." And just as he states this at the beginning of Revelation, he does so again at the very end of the book, saying, "Look, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to repay each person according to the works that they have done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." Now, does anybody after all that have any doubt who Jesus is? No. So is Jesus God? Yes. And so, outside of having a little more confidence just to say yes right off the bat, how can this help you in, say, witnessing with other people? In town here, do we have other practicing faiths that don't believe Jesus is God? Yeah. Mormons do not believe Jesus is God. They will say that he's an Elohim, but that is using using the definition of the word in an obscure manner. It doesn't mean that he's the eternal God in their view. Jehovah's Witnesses do not see him as God. I just got a letter the other day from somebody from Eagle River about, hey, would you like to come talk to me about this? Sure. So game on. I know that there are, there's Jews that live in town who, don't embrace the Messiah. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, that violates the Shema, the whole Lord thy God is one thing, which, as you just saw, is divine plurality a thing in the Old Testament? Yeah, it's their own faith. And so there's plenty of other people in town that, this could be used for, but at the end of the day, if there's anything else, is that as we're in the second week of Advent here, is that, we could be thinking that a little bit more of that it actually was God himself that came down to earth and became man. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. And in the meantime, stay salty.